The wind in Cinder Ridge did not blow so much as it scoured. It carried the grit of the high plains, a fine, biting powder that found its way through the tightest window sash and settled in the creases of the skin. It tasted of alkali and dried grass. And to Clara Whitlow, it tasted of penance. Clara stood on the porch of the trading post, her hands red and raw from the lye soap she had been using since before dawn. She was 22 years old, though the sun and the silence of the territory had etched fine lines at the corners of her eyes that belonged to a woman a decade older. She wiped her hands on her apron, a reflex she could not stop. Her hands had to be moving. If they were still, they might tremble, and trembling attracted attention. Attention was dangerous. Invisibility was survival. The settlement of Cinder Ridge was less a town and more a stubborn refusal to leave. Clustered near the muddy snake of a river that marked the edge of what the government called safety. It was a collection of rough-hewn timber buildings and sod houses huddled against the vast, terrifying emptiness of the horizon. Here, the fear of Comanche raids was as constant as the hunger in the bellies of the poor. Men walked with rifles in the crooks of their arms, and women looked at the sunset not with admiration for its beauty, but with dread for what the darkness might bring. The door behind Clara opened. She did not turn, but her shoulders stiffened, a minute contraction of muscle that she instantly forced to relax. She knew the weight of those footsteps. Elias Whitlow stepped out into the morning glare. He was a tall man, broad in the chest, with a beard the color of iron filings and eyes that were a pale, watery blue. To the town, he was a pillar of strength. He was the trader who extended credit when the crops failed, the lay preacher who read the Psalms over the graves of children taken by fever, the man who held the community together with his booming voice and his heavy, leather-bound Bible. To Clara, he was the lock on the door. He was the shadow in the hallway. "Morning, daughter," Elias said. His voice was rich, projected as if he were addressing a congregation rather than a single woman. "Good morning, Father," Clara replied. She kept her eyes fixed on the distant scrub brush. She never called him by his name, and she never called him stepfather, not where anyone could hear. He required the title. It was part of the theater. "The wagon is loaded," Elias said, moving to stand beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a heavy, possessive weight. Clara forced herself not to flinch. She counted the beats of her heart. 1, 2, 3. She willed her skin to turn to wood. "You have washed the linens?" "Yes, sir." "They are drying on the line back of the store." "Good." A woman's work is the testament of her spirit. Cleanliness is next to godliness. "Clara, you know that." "I know," she whispered. His fingers squeezed her shoulder, just hard enough to bruise, a reminder of the strength he kept coiled beneath his Sunday coat. Then he let go, his hand sliding down her arm in a way that made her stomach turn over, before he stepped off the porch and toward the horses. "Make ready," Elias called back, his voice shifting to the jovial tone he used for business. "We ride for the depot at noon. I have business with the army quartermaster, and you have supplies to buy for the house. Bring the boy. It does not look good to leave him unattended." Clara let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. She turned and slipped back inside the house, the gloom of the interior a welcome relief from the blinding Texas sun. The back room was small, smelling of dust and dried sage. On a pallet in the corner, a small boy sat playing with a wooden block. He was 3 years old, with hair like corn silk and eyes that mirrored Clara's own dark vigilance. Davy looked up as she entered. Clara dropped to her knees, the practiced armor of her expression cracking just enough to let the tenderness through. "Come here, little bird," she murmured, gathering him into her arms. He was small for his age, quiet in the way children learn to be when noise brought punishment. To the town. Davy was her younger relation, a cousin's child taken in after a fever swept through a distant homestead. That was the story Elias had crafted. It was a lie that saved his reputation and kept the town from asking questions about why a widowed stepfather and his stepdaughter lived alone in a house with a crying infant. Clara smoothed Davy's hair. The truth was a stone in her throat that she could never swallow and never spit out. Davy was hers. He was the offspring of the man who prayed over supper and sold grain to the starving. But saying it aloud would mean death, perhaps for her, certainly for Elias's reputation, and likely for the boy, who would be branded a bastard of incest, an abomination in the eyes of the harsh frontier church. "We are going to town. Davy," she said softly, "you must be good. You must hold my hand and not let go. Do not look at the men. Do not speak unless spoken to." The boy nodded solemnly. He understood the rules of their world better than most grown men. The drive to the trading depot took an hour. Elias drove the wagon with a straight back, tipping his hat to the settlers they passed. The people of Cinder Ridge looked up from their plows and their washing tubs to wave. They saw a good man, a provider, taking his family to market. They saw Clara, pale and modest in her bonnet, holding a child on her lap. They saw a picture of resilience. They did not see the shotgun Elias kept under the seat, nor did they know that the crates covered by canvas in the back of the wagon were not full of seed corn, as the manifest claimed. Clara knew better than to ask what was in the crates. Curiosity had been beaten out of her long ago, replaced by a dull, aching observation. She noticed things. She noticed that the wagon sat heavy on the axles. She noticed that Elias had been meeting with men who did not belong to the settlement, men with hard eyes and accents that drifted between Texan drawl and something sharper, Northern. When they arrived at the depot, the heat was already rising in shimmering waves off the hard-packed earth. The depot was a chaotic hub of activity, a place where the tenuous supply lines of civilization met the raw demand of the frontier. Soldiers from the nearby fort mingled with trappers, buffalo hunters, and the ragged families of settlers. Elias reined in the horses near the general store. "You get the flour and the coffee," he commanded, handing Clara a few coins. "Do not dally. I have matters to discuss with Sergeant Miller." Clara took the money, her fingers brushing his palm. He held on for a second longer than necessary, his eyes boring into hers. "Keep the boy close," he said, his voice low. "I will not have him running like a savage." "I will," she said. She climbed down, lifting Davy from the seat. The ground was hard and uneven. She took Davy's hand, gripping it tightly, and walked toward the mercantile. The store was crowded and smelled of tobacco smoke, cured leather, and sweat. Clara moved through the aisles with the fluid grace of someone trying to occupy no space at all. She kept her head down, the bonnet acting as a blinder, shielding her face. "Well, if it isn't Clara Whitlow." The voice was shrill and carried the specific, biting judgment of the town gossip. "Mrs. Gable." Clara froze, then forced the corners of her mouth upward into the polite, empty smile she wore like a shield. "Good day, Mrs. Gable," Clara said, turning. The older woman looked Clara up and down, her eyes lingering on the plainness of Clara's dress and the child clinging to her skirt. "Your father is looking well," Mrs. Gable said, though her tone suggested she was fishing for something else. "A saint of a man, taking care of you and that boy all these years. Most men would have married you off or sent you east to find work. It is a charity. Truly, he is very good to us." Clara lied. The words tasted like ash. "I suppose, Mrs. Gable sniffed, "though it is unnatural. A girl your age without a husband. People talk. Clara, they say you are too proud, or perhaps too damaged. The frontier is no place for a woman without a man to master her." Clara tightened her grip on Davy's hand until the boy whimpered slightly. She loosened her fingers instantly, stroking his thumb with hers in apology. "I am content to serve my family, Mrs. Gable," Clara said softly. "Serve, indeed, Mrs." Gable turned her attention to a bolt of calico, dismissing Clara as if she were of no more consequence than a sack of beans. Clara finished her purchases quickly. A sack of flour, a tin of coffee, a small bag of sugar. She counted the change 3 times. Elias would check. He always checked. If a penny was missing. There would be a lecture on stewardship that would last for hours, followed by the silence that was worse than the shouting. When she stepped back out into the blinding light, she looked for the wagon. It had been moved. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She scanned the depot. She saw the wagon parked near the livery stable, tucked away in the shadows of the overhang. Elias was there, but he was not with Sergeant Miller. He was speaking with two men Clara had never seen before. One was a Mexican man with a scar running through his eyebrow. The other was a white man in a dust-colored coat, who looked like he had slept in a ditch. Clara stepped behind a stack of barrels, pulling Davy close to her skirts. She should not watch. Seeing was dangerous, but she could not move. Elias was gesturing to the crates in the wagon bed. He pried the lid off one with a crowbar. The sun caught the dull gleam of metal. Rifles. Brand new repeating rifles. Clara's breath hitched. These were not for the settlers. The settlers bought old muskets or shotguns. These were military grade, and Elias was not selling them to the army. He was selling them to the men who moved between the lines, Comancheros, traders who sold weapons to the tribes in exchange for stolen cattle and horses. The realization made Clara dizzy. Elias preached fire and brimstone against the heathen savages every Sunday. He prayed for the destruction of the Comanche, and here he was, arming them for profit. He was feeding the very war that terrified the town, ensuring the raids would continue, ensuring the fear that made him so necessary would never fade. He was a monster in every direction. The transaction was happening quickly. Gold coins were exchanged, heavy, clinking sounds that carried on the dry air. Elias shook hands with the man in the dust-colored coat. He looked smug, satisfied. Clara turned to retreat, to run back to the safety of the general store's porch before he saw her. She needed to pretend she knew nothing. Ignorance was the only safety she had. But as she turned, the world exploded. It did not start with a scream, but with the crack of a rifle shot that shattered the air like glass. The man in the dust-colored coat, the one shaking Elias's hand, jerked violently and collapsed, a spray of red misting the side of the wagon. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then, chaos erupted. Shouts rang out from the riverbank. Gunsmoke bloomed white and gray, drifting across the depot. Horses reared, screaming in panic. "Comanche!" Someone screamed. "Raid! It's a raid!" The word turned the depot into a bedlam of terror. Men scrambled for weapons. Women grabbed their children and ran for the nearest cover. The neat order of the settlement dissolved into a stampede of boots and hooves. Clara did not scream. She did not freeze. Her life had been a long lesson in crisis. She scooped Davy up into her arms, his small weight pressing against her chest, and she ran. She did not run toward Elias. She ran away from the wagon, away from the gunfire that was rapidly intensifying near the livery. She ducked between two buildings, her boots slipping on the loose dirt. The air filled with the sharp tang of gunpowder and the acrid smell of burning wood. Someone had knocked over a lantern. The dry timber of a shed was already catching fire. The flames roared up with terrifying speed, fed by the wind. Clara pressed herself against the rough wood of a water trough, shielding Davy's body with her own. "Hush, Davy, hush," she whispered into his hair. Through the gaps between the buildings, she saw flashes of movement. Riders. They moved with a fluidity that the settlers' heavy plow horses lacked. They were not a large war party, perhaps a dozen men, but they struck with the precision of a hawk diving. They were not there to burn the town, she realized with a jolt of clarity. They were there for the wagon. They were there for the guns Elias had been selling. The irony was bitter and sharp. Elias's double-dealing had brought the war right to their doorstep. A group of settlers had formed a firing line near the general store, their shots wild and panicked. The Comanche riders returned fire from beneath the necks of their ponies, difficult targets in the swirling smoke. Clara saw Elias. He was crouching behind the wagon, firing his revolver. He looked terrified, his face pale, the mask of the patriarch stripped away to reveal a coward protecting his gold. He was not looking for her. He was not looking for Davy. He was looking at his money pouch. She felt a cold, hard hatred solidify in her gut. He would let them die. "Clara, we have to move," she told herself. The fire was spreading. The heat was becoming unbearable, pressing against her skin. She stood up, hoisting Davy higher on her hip. If she could make it to the root cellar behind the dry goods store, they might be safe. It was 20 yards of open ground. "Run!" she commanded her legs. She bolted from cover. The noise was deafening, the pop of rifles, the roar of the fire, the screams of men. She kept her eyes locked on the cellar door. 10 yards. A horse thundered past her. So close the wind of its passing whipped her skirt. She stumbled but kept her footing. 5 yards. A figure loomed up out of the smoke, blocking her path. It was not a settler. The horse was a roan paint, its coat streaked with sweat and ash. The rider pulled the beast up short, the animal rearing on its hind legs. Clara skidded to a halt, clutching Davy so tight he gasped. She looked up. The man on the horse was young, perhaps 30. He wore buckskins darkened by grease and travel, and his hair was long, braided with strips of red cloth. His face was painted, a stripe of black across the eyes, but beneath the paint, his expression was not the frenzied bloodlust she had been taught to expect. It was hard, focused, and terrifyingly calm. This was Tahuya. She did not know his name then, only his power. He looked at her. He looked at the child in her arms. Clara saw the decision form in his eyes. In the chaos of the raid, captives were currency. They were leverage. They were life. She turned to run back the way she came, but she was too slow. Tahuya kicked his horse forward. He leaned down with the impossible grace of a man born in the saddle. His arm swept out, hard as an iron bar. He did not strike her. He grabbed the fabric of her dress at the waist, his other hand catching her arm. With a heave that stole the breath from her lungs, he swung her upward. Clara screamed then, a raw sound that was lost in the din. The world tilted violently. She was dragged up across the horse's withers, the pommel of the saddle digging into her ribs. She fought to keep her hold on Davy. "Please!" she gasped, the word torn from her throat. "The boy." Tahuya did not speak. He adjusted his grip, pinning her leg against the saddle, ensuring she could not throw herself off. He saw that she held the child. He did not pull Davy away. He simply secured them both, his arm locking over them like a vice. He wheeled the horse around, turning away from the burning buildings, away from the shouting men, away from Elias Whitlow. Clara caught a final glimpse of her stepfather. He was standing over the body of the Mexican trader, frantically stuffing gold coins into his pockets while the wagon burned. He did not look up. He did not see her go. Then the horse surged forward, galloping into the thick, choking smoke. The speed was terrifying. The ground blurred beneath them. Clara shut her eyes, burying her face in Davy's small, trembling shoulder. She felt the powerful muscles of the horse beneath her, the heat of the warrior's body against her back. They were leaving the settlement. They were crossing the river. They were passing into the void. Clara had spent her life fearing this moment. The stories said that death was preferable to capture. The stories said the Comanche were demons who would peel the skin from her bones. She waited for the blow. She waited for the cruelty. But there was only the rhythm of the gallop, the wind rushing past her ears, and the terrible, silent certainty that Clara Whitlow had ceased to exist. She was no longer a person. She was a ghost being carried into the wasteland. She clutched Davy, her fingers white-knuckled in his shirt. "I am here," she whispered into the roar of the wind, though she knew he could not hear her. "I am here, behind them." The smoke of Cinder Ridge rose into the uncaring blue sky, a black mark on the edge of the world. Ahead, there was only the open plain, the dust, and the long, blind ride into the unknown. Clara braced herself for the end of her life. She did not know yet that she was riding toward the beginning of it. The camp was not a place of rest, but a momentary pause in a ceaseless, grinding motion. They had ridden for 3 days straight, stopping only when the horses threatened to founder, sleeping in short, jagged bursts on the hardpan earth. When they finally established a semi-permanent halt in the shadow of a limestone canyon wall. Clara Whitlow felt less like a human woman and more like a hollowed-out gourd rattling in the wind. The land here was different from the scrubby borders of Cinder Ridge. This was the high country, a vast ocean of short grass and red dust that stretched into an eternity of silence. The air was thin and dry, sucking the moisture from Clara's lips until they cracked and bled. She sat on a buffalo robe near the center of the encampment. Davy pressed tight against her side. The boy had stopped crying days ago. He had lapsed into a wide-eyed, terrifying silence, his small hands gripping Clara's skirt with a strength that turned his knuckles white. Clara kept her head down. She watched the ground. She watched the feet of the people who moved around her, moccasins made of soft deerskin, encrusted with the dust of 100 miles. She expected cruelty. She had been raised on the stories of the frontier, tales whispered by the fireside of women skinned alive and children dashed against rocks. She waited for the firebrand, the whip, the knife, but the cruelty did not come. Instead, there was a heavy, suffocating indifference to the band. Clara was not a prize. She was a burden. She was another mouth to feed in a land where game was scarce. Another slow-moving body to protect when the soldiers came. "Get up." The voice was low, heavily accented but understandable. Clara looked up. A woman stood over her, her face a map of deep wrinkles and sun-darkened skin. She held a water skin made of a paunch. She thrust it at Clara. "Water," the woman said, pointing toward a trickle of a spring that seeped from the canyon wall a quarter-mile away. "Work." Clara took the skin. Her legs trembled as she stood, the muscles cramping from days in the saddle. She did not argue. She hoisted Davy onto her hip, though his weight made her stagger, and took the skin. She walked to the spring. She filled the skin. She walked back. This became her existence. The sun rose. A white-hot coin hammered into the sky. And Clara worked. She gathered dried dung for the fires because there was no wood. She scraped the flesh from hides until her fingers were raw and her shoulders burned with a fire that never went out. She carried water until the path to the spring was worn smooth by her boots. She learned to make herself small. In Cinder Ridge, she had been invisible to avoid Elias's dark moods. Here, she became invisible to survive. She learned that eye contact was a challenge, that slowness was an insult, and that silence was the only language that mattered. Through the haze of her exhaustion, she began to see him. Tahuya. He was not the largest man in the band, nor the loudest. There were younger warriors who preened and shouted, who painted their horses with jagged lightning bolts and boasted of the scalps they would take. Tahuya did not boast. He moved with a quiet, lethal economy. He was the center of gravity for the 30 souls in the camp. Clara watched him from the periphery of the firelight. She saw how the others looked at him, not with fear, exactly, but with a deference that was absolute. When disputes broke out over the distribution of meat, Tahuya did not raise his voice. He simply stepped between the men, spoke 3 or 4 words, and the anger dissolved into shame. He was a man of order. Clara realized this with a jolt of surprise. The settlers believed the Comanche to be agents of chaos, wild animals who burned and killed for sport. But Tahuya's camp was a machine of discipline. Everything had a place. Every person had a task. The survival of the group depended on a rigid set of rules that were never spoken but strictly obeyed. One evening, a young warrior kicked a dog that had come too close to the cooking pot. The dog yelped, and the warrior laughed. Tahuya was there in a heartbeat. He did not strike the boy. He simply gripped the warrior's shoulder, his fingers digging into the muscle, and spoke in a low murmur. The young man's face went slack. He looked down. He stepped back. It was a reprimand delivered without violence. Yet it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. He values control, Clara thought, scrubbing a pot with sand. He does not like waste. Pain is waste. It was a strange, disorienting comfort. She was a prisoner, yes, but she was in the hands of a man who did not seem to enjoy suffering. Yet the suffering was there, woven into the very fabric of the camp. As Clara's terror began to dull into a wary observation, she saw the cracks in their armor. She saw the coughing. It was a deep, rattling cough that seemed to shake the very bones of the people. It affected the old and the very young. She saw the fresh scars on the women's arms, the signs of mourning where they had hacked at their own flesh in grief for husbands and sons lost to the long war. They are dying, Clara realized. She was scraping a hide near the edge of the camp when she heard the wailing. It was a sound that transcended language, the universal, jagged cry of a mother in terror. Clara looked up. Near the center fire, a woman was rocking back and forth, clutching a bundle of blankets. Tahuya stood nearby, his face grim, his arms crossed over his chest. A medicine man was shaking a rattle over the bundle, chanting in a rhythm that sounded like a failing heartbeat. Clara knew that sound. She had heard it in the sod houses of the settlement when the fever took the babies. She looked at Davy, who was playing quietly in the dust with a smooth stone she had found for him. He was safe for the moment, but the child in the bundle was not. She should stay put. She should keep her head down. To interfere was to invite wrath. But Clara Whitlow had spent her life nursing the broken things Elias had left behind. She had learned the secrets of the root and the leaf because the doctor was too expensive and often too drunk to help. She stood up. The movement was small, but in the stillness of the camp, it was a shout. She walked toward the fire. The woman looked up, her eyes wild and red-rimmed. She pulled the bundle closer, hissing a warning. Tahuya turned. His gaze landed on Clara, heavy and unreadable. He did not speak. He waited. Clara fell to her knees beside the woman. She did not touch the child. She simply looked. The boy was perhaps 5 years old. His face was flushed a dark, angry red, and his breathing was a shallow, whistling gasp. His skin was dry, burning with a heat that radiated through the wool blanket. "Willow," Clara said. The word hung in the air, English and alien. The woman stared at her, uncomprehending. Clara pointed to the riverbed in the distance, where a line of scrubby trees marked the water. Willow bark, for the fever, and sage, for the steam. She mimed the action of stripping bark, of boiling water. She put her hand to her own forehead, then made a gesture of the heat breaking. The woman looked at Tahuya. The leader watched Clara with eyes that narrowed slightly. He was assessing her. He was looking for the trick. Clara met his gaze. She did not plead. She did not beg. She simply held his look with the tired desperation of a woman who knew what death looked like and wanted to stop it. "Let me," she said. Tahuya nodded once, a microscopic dip of the chin. Clara scrambled up. She ran to the riverbed, her skirts tangling around her boots. She found the willow trees, their branches spindly and dry. She used a sharp rock to strip the inner bark, her fingers working with frantic precision. She gathered sagebrush, crushing the silver-green leaves to release the pungent oil. When she returned, the camp was watching her. She felt their eyes, 100 distinct weights on her back. She asked for a pot of water. She boiled the bark. She made a tent of blankets over the sick child and the steaming pot of sage, forcing the boy to breathe the medicated vapor. She took a cloth, dipped it in cool water, and bathed the boy's face, neck, and chest, over and over, fighting the heat that tried to consume him. She worked through the night. She did not sleep. She did not eat. The moon rose, a cold white eye staring down at the canyon, and Clara worked. Sometime near dawn, the boy's breathing changed. The whistling gasp smoothed out into a deeper, rhythmic draw. His skin, which had been dry as parchment, broke into a sweat. The fever broke. Clara sat back on her heels, exhausted, her hands trembling. The mother let out a sob, this time of relief, and pressed her face against her son's damp hair. Clara stood up. She felt dizzy. She turned to go back to her place on the edge of the camp, back to her invisibility. "You have strong hands." Clara froze. Tahuya was standing 3 paces away. He had been watching the whole time. He spoke in English, broken, halted, but clear. "I learned," Clara said, her voice raspy. "You are not soft," Tahuya said. He was not praising her. He was stating a fact, like noting that a horse had good teeth or a knife held an edge. Most white women die here. They fade. You do not fade. I have a son, Clara said, looking toward where Davy slept curled in a ball. I cannot fade. Tahuya followed her gaze. He looked at the boy, then back at Clara. He is small, Tahuya said, but he is quiet. That is good. He turned and walked away. There was no thank you. There was no smile. But the next morning, when the meat was distributed, Clara was given a portion of the hump, the rich, fatty cut usually reserved for the hunters. And the woman whose son she had saved brought her a pair of moccasins, silently replacing Clara's ruined leather boots. It was not friendship. It was a transaction. Usefulness for survival. But the dynamic had shifted. Clara was no longer just a prisoner. She was a resource. Days turned into weeks. The band moved constantly, a nomadic shadow drifting across the plains. Clara's skin darkened to the color of nut-brown clay. Her hands grew calloused and hard. She lost weight, the softness of the settlement stripping away to reveal the wire and bone beneath. She began to understand the language. It came to her in fragments. Commands first, then names, then the flow of conversation. She learned that the band was running. They were being hunted not just by the army, but by other things, hunger, despair, and the closing walls of a world that no longer had a place for them. It was during a midday halt that the truth of her capture finally sharpened into focus. Clara was mending a tear in a tipi cover. Sitting in the shade of a wagon the band had repurposed. Tahuya was sitting nearby with two other men, older warriors with scars that mapped the history of the Indian wars on their bodies. They were speaking in low, urgent tones. They spoke of the traitor, the white wolf. Clara's needle paused. She kept her head down, but her ears strained to catch the words. "He takes the gold," one warrior said, spitting on the ground. "He sells the rifles that jam. He tells the bluecoats where the water is. He is a snake," the other agreed. "He smiles with one face and bites with the other." Tahuya's voice cut through the anger. "We know this. The white wolf feeds on both sides. He grows fat on our blood and the blood of his own people. The white wolf. Elias?" Clara felt a cold sickness pool in her stomach. She had suspected it, of course. She had seen the guns, but hearing it confirmed, hearing the hatred in their voices, made the betrayal absolute. Elias was not just a criminal. He was a war profiteer of the worst kind. He sold the Comanche the means to fight, then sold their location to the army to be slaughtered, all while preaching the gospel in Cinder Ridge. And he was her father, in the eyes of the law. And in the eyes of these men, she was the daughter of the white wolf. If they knew who she was, really knew, they would kill her. The realization made her fingers slip. The needle pricked her thumb, a bright bead of blood blooming on the skin. She quickly wiped it away. That night, the temperature plummeted. The wind came howling down from the north, carrying the bite of early frost. The camp huddled against the cold. Clara had no buffalo robe of her own. She had the thin wool blanket she had been captured with, now threadbare and full of holes. She wrapped it around herself and Davy, curling her body around the boy to share warmth. But the cold was relentless. It seeped into her marrow. She shivered violently, her teeth chattering in the darkness. She was alone. She was thousands of miles from anything she knew. She was the daughter of a monster, living among people who would hate her if they knew the truth. The despair hit her then, sudden and overwhelming. It was not the fear of death, but the crushing weight of endurance. How long could she do this? How long until she broke? She pressed her face into the dirt and let the tears come. She did not make a sound. She had learned to cry silently years ago. In the room at the end of the hall, in Elias's house, her shoulders shook, her breath hitching in her chest. But she made no noise. A shadow fell over her. Clara froze. She wiped her face frantically on her sleeve and looked up. Tahuya stood there. He was wrapped in a thick buffalo robe, the fur dark and heavy. He looked down at her, his face obscured by the night. lit only by the faint glow of the dying embers. He did not speak. He watched her for a long moment, listening to the jagged rhythm of her breathing. He saw the tears she tried to hide. He saw the shivering she could not stop. Slowly, deliberately, he unfastened the robe from his shoulders. He held it out. Clara stared at it. It was a kingly gift. It was warmth. It was survival. "Take it," Tahuya said. "The cold takes the weak first." Clara reached out, her hand trembling. Her fingers brushed the coarse fur. She looked up at him, searching for pity. She found none. She found only a pragmatic recognition of her value, and perhaps something else. Acknowledgement. "Thank you," she whispered. She took the robe. It was heavy, smelling of smoke and animal musk. She pulled it over herself and Davy. The warmth was instant, enveloping. Tahuya did not leave immediately. He crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet. "Why do you cry?" he asked. "You are alive. Alive is not enough," Clara said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. "It is all there is," Tahuya replied. "Yesterday is smoke, tomorrow is wind. There is only now. You breathe, you work, you fight. That is enough." He stood up then, turning his back to the wind. "Sleep, woman of the white wolf," he said. "We ride early." He knew. Clara's heart stopped. He called her woman of the white wolf. He knew she came from Elias's wagon. He knew she belonged to the man they hated, and yet he had given her the robe. She watched him walk away into the darkness. She pulled the fur tighter around her chin. He knew who she was, and he had not killed her. Why? The question haunted her as she drifted into a restless sleep. The answer came 2 days later, not in words, but in dust. The scouts rode in at a full gallop. Their horses lathered and blowing hard, they shouted to Tahuya before their mounts had even stopped moving. "Bluecoats," one shouted. "And settlers. A posse. They are close. Half a day's ride. They have the long guns." The camp exploded into motion. There was no panic, only a terrifying acceleration of routine. Tippies were struck in minutes. Fires were doused. Horses were loaded. Tahuya was everywhere, shouting orders in Comanche, his voice cracking like a whip. "Move! We move now! To the Badlands!" Clara scrambled to pack her meager belonging. She strapped Davy to her back with a strip of cloth, Indian style. She did not have a horse of her own. She would have to walk, or run, alongside the pack animals. They moved out at a grueling pace. The terrain turned jagged, a nightmare of broken rock and steep ravines. The horses struggled. The old people stumbled. Clara walked. She marched until her feet blistered and broke in the moccasins. She marched until her lungs burned like fire. She did not complain. She did not lag behind. She focused on the back of the horse in front of her and put one foot forward, then the other. Tahuya rode back and forth along the line, urging them on. He saw Clara walking. He saw the child on her back. He saw the grim set of her jaw. He rode up beside her. "You slow us down," he said. But his tone was not accusing. It was testing. "I am keeping pace." Clara gasped, not looking at him. "The riders are coming," Tahuya said. "They come for the trader's goods. They come for you." Clara looked up at him then. The sun was high and brutal. Sweat tracked through the dust on her face. "They do not come for me," she said. Tahuya halted his horse. The line of the band continued to move past them, a river of desperate humanity. "Why?" Tahuya asked. He looked down at her, his eyes piercing. "You are his daughter. The white wolf moves heaven and earth for his gold. Does he not move it for his blood?" Clara stopped. The exhaustion, the fear, the years of silence, it all welled up in her throat. She looked at this warrior, this man who had shown her more respect in 3 weeks than her stepfather had in a lifetime. She looked at the band, these people who were being hunted like animals because of men like Elias. She needed him to know. She needed to sever the cord that bound her to the monster back in Cinder Ridge. She needed to stand on her own ground, even if that ground was a grave. She stepped closer to Tahuya's stirrup. She raised her head, shielding her eyes against the sun. She spoke clearly. her voice cutting through the noise of the wind and the horses. "He is not my father," Clara said. "He is my stepfather." Tahuya frowned. "It is the same. You are his family." Clara shook her head. She reached back and touched Davy's leg. She took a breath that tasted of dust and old pain. "No," she said. "I am not his family. I was his property." She looked Tahuya dead in the eye. "My stepfather used me for offspring," she confessed, her voice thin but unbroken. The words hung in the air. Grotesque and undeniable. The Comanche went silent. The riders near them stopped. The women paused. The confession rippled through the immediate circle, translated by the shock on the faces of those who understood English. Tahuya stared at her. His expression did not change, but his eyes changed. The hardness in them fractured. He looked at Clara, and then he looked at the boy on her back, the boy with the corn silk hair and the eyes that held too much shadow. He looked at the child, he looked at the woman, and he understood. The horror of it, the taboo that transcended culture, landed like a physical blow. Tahuya knew the brutality of the world. He knew war. He knew torture. But this betrayal of the blood, this predation within the home, was a rot that disgusted him to his core. He looked back at the horizon, toward where the pursuers were coming, toward where Elias Whitlow was riding. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. Then, Tahuya looked back at Clara. He did not offer pity. He offered something far more terrifying. He nodded. "Ride," he commanded, gesturing to the space behind his saddle. Clara did not hesitate. She reached up, and he gripped her arm. He pulled her up behind him. They rode, but now, they were not just running away. They were riding toward a reckoning. The silence that followed Clara's confession was not empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that seemed to press the very air out of the high plains. The wind continued to hiss through the buffalo grass, and the horses stamped their hooves. But the people, the 30 souls of the band, were struck still. They had ridden hard for another hour after she spoke, putting distance between themselves and the phantom pursuit. But the words traveled with them. "Used me for offspring." It was a sentence that did not belong in the open air. It belonged in the dark corners of civilized houses. Behind the velvet curtains and locked doors of the settlements the Comanche had learned to despise. When they finally made camp in a dry wash protected by a rim of sandstone, Tahuya helped Clara down from his horse. He did not look at her. He did not speak. His hands were firm but impersonal, treating her with the same detached care he would show a valuable rifle or a lame mare. This silence terrified Clara more than the shouting she had expected. In Cinder Ridge, silence was the precursor to violence. Silence meant Elias was thinking, and Elias thinking always ended in pain. She stood by the dying fire of the setting sun, clutching Davy to her hip, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Had she shamed them? Had she made herself too unclean to be tolerated? She watched Tahuya walk to the edge of the camp, staring out at the darkening horizon, his back a wall of rejection. She felt the eyes of the others on her. Some of the men looked at her with a new, dark intensity, rage. Not at her, but at the crime she represented. The Comanche knew violence. They knew the brutality of war, the taking of captives, the harsh justice of the frontier. But the abuse of a child by the one sworn to protect her, that was a corruption that offended the deep, spiritual order of their world. A few of the younger women whispered behind their hands, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. Clara shrank under the scrutiny. She moved to the periphery of the camp, finding a spot near a twisted mesquite bush. She sat down, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small again. "Eat." Clara flinched. An older woman stood over her. It was the one called Graygrass, a matriarch whose husband had been a war chief before the pox took him. She held a bowl of stew, the steam curling into the cooling air. Clara looked up, expecting judgment. She saw only a hard, weathered sorrow. Graygrass did not smile, but her eyes were not unkind. They were the eyes of a woman who had buried children, who had seen the world break a dozen times and had simply refused to stop breathing. "Take it," Graygrass said. "You need strength. The boy needs milk." Clara took the bowl, her fingers brushing the woman's leathery hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Graygrass sat down in the dirt beside her, groaning slightly as her joints settled. She looked at Davy, who was sleeping fitfully in Clara's lap. "The white wolf did this?" Graygrass asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of the hysterical gossip of the settlement women. "Yes," Clara said. "He is your father." "No, he married my mother when I was small. She died when I was 10. He became my guardian." Graygrass nodded, staring into the middle distance. "We have seen this. The white men build fences to keep the world out, but they lock the wolves inside with the sheep." "I had nowhere to go," Clara said, the need to explain rising in her throat like bile. She had to make them understand she was not complicit. "I tried to run when I was 15. He found me. He brought me back. He told the town I was touched in the head. He said I wandered. He locked my shoes away for a year." Graygrass made a sound in her throat, a sharp click of disgust. "A man who eats his own is not a man." "He is a Wendigo, a hunger that is never full." She reached out and touched Clara's arm. It was a brief, dry touch, but it anchored Clara to the earth. "You are here now," Graygrass said. "The hunger cannot reach you here." But the hunger was reaching for them. The debate began as soon as the moon rose. The council was not a formal affair of feathers and drums, but a tense gathering of the men near the central fire. Clara watched from the shadows, straining to understand the rapid flow of the Comanche tongue mixed with Spanish and broken English. "We should leave her," a warrior named Stonehand argued, his voice sharp. "She brings the bluecoats. She brings the white wolf. He will hunt us until the ponies drop. He hunts us anyway." Another man countered. "He sells the guns to the Apache. He sells the maps to the soldiers. But this is blood." Stonehand insisted. "A man will burn the world for his blood. If we kill him, the army will come with cannons. If we keep her, he will follow." "Leave her. Let him have his broken thing back." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. His broken thing. Then Tahuya spoke. He did not shout. He sat on a rock, sharpening his knife with a rhythmic, scraping sound that cut through the argument. "She is not a thing," Tahuya said. He stopped scraping and looked up. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, the grim set of his mouth. "I had a sister," Tahuya said quietly. The men fell silent. They knew the story. 10 years ago, a raid by rangers. Women taken, bodies found later in a ravine, used and discarded. The men who took her were leaders in their town. Tahuya continued. They wore badges. They read from the Black Book on Sundays. They felt no shame because she was Comanche. They thought she was property. He pointed the knife toward where Clara sat in the darkness. "This woman is the same. The white wolf thinks she is property. He thinks he owns the right to break her. If we give her back, we agree with him. We say, 'Yes, you are right. The strong eat the weak.'" Stonehand scowled. "We cannot fight the whole world. Tahuya, we are 30. They are thousands. We do not fight the world," Tahuya said. "We fight this man." He stood up, sheathing the knife. "We keep her. She works. She is useful. If the white wolf comes, he will find teeth. Not a gift." The council broke up in murmurs. It was not a victory, but it was a decision. Clara let out a breath that shuddered through her entire frame. She was safe, for tonight. The days that followed fell into a new, strange rhythm. The band moved north, seeking the shelter of the canyonlands where the water was sweet and the caves offered hiding. The fear of pursuit was constant, but the panic had settled into a grim alertness. Clara worked harder than she had ever worked in Cinder Ridge. There, work had been a performance to avoid punishment. Here, it was a contribution to survival. She gathered mesquite beans, grinding them into meal. She learned to identify the tracks of lizard and rabbit. She mended moccasins with sinew and an awl. And she watched Tahuya. He kept his distance, but the quality of the distance had changed. It was no longer the distance of a captor guarding a prisoner. It was the distance of a man giving a startled animal room to graze. One morning, just before dawn, Clara was struggling to lift a heavy water skin onto a pack mule. Her arms shook with the effort. Tahuya appeared at her elbow. He did not take the skin from her. He placed one hand under the bottom of the sack, taking half the weight. "Lift," he said. Together, they swung it up. He tied the knot, his fingers moving with sure, quick motions. He smelled of sage smoke and horse sweat, a scent that was becoming the smell of safety to Clara. "You carry too much water," he said. "The mule is old. The children need to drink," Clara replied, wiping hair from her eyes. Tahuya looked at her. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the world in violent oranges and bruised purples. "You are not a mule," he said. "I am strong enough." He studied her face. "I see that." It was the first time he had looked at her directly since the confession. His eyes did not travel over her body as Elias's did, assessing, consuming. Tahuya looked at her eyes. He looked at the set of her mouth. He was seeing her, the person who lived behind the armor. "Do you know how to shoot?" he asked suddenly. Clara blinked. "No, Elias. He did not allow it. He said guns were for men." Tahuya reached into his saddlebag and pulled out an old Navy Colt revolver. The metal was worn gray, the wood grip smooth. He checked the cylinder, then held it out to her. "Handle first. Learn," he said. Clara took the gun. It was heavier than she expected, cold and lethal. "Why?" she asked. "Because I cannot be everywhere," Tahuya said. "And a woman who belongs to herself should know how to kill a man who tries to take her." He turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the dawn light, the weight of the gun in her hand feeling like a key to a door she had never known existed. Their conversations remained like this, spare, functional, yet laden with a subtext that made Clara's breath hitch. He did not court her. There were no flowers, no poetry. There was only the way he ensured she had the spot nearest the fire when the wind blew, the way he cut the toughest meat for her before handing her the bowl, the way he stopped the other men from staring at her with a single, sharp glance. Clara found herself watching him not with fear, but with a confusing, terrifying warmth. She had been taught that desire was a sin, a trap, a weapon men used against women. She had never known it could be this quiet thing, this slow unfurling of trust. She wanted to sit near him. She wanted to hear his voice. It terrified her. 3 nights later, the world narrowed down to a crack in the earth. The scouts had signaled a patrol. Not the army, but a militia group, ranchers and hired guns, likely looking for scalps to sell or cattle to reclaim. They were too close to outrun in the open moonlight. "Scatter," Tahuya ordered. "Hide." The band dissolved into the landscape. Tahuya grabbed Clara's arm. "Run!" They left the horses with the younger boys in a box canyon and scrambled up a scree slope. Tahuya moved like a ghost. Clara followed, her breath tearing at her lungs. Davy strapped tight to her back. They found a fissure in the rock face, a narrow ravine barely wide enough for 2 people, choked with shadow. Tahuya shoved her inside, then squeezed in after her. "Deep," he whispered. "Go deep." They pushed back until the walls narrowed to a pinch. The air was cool and smelled of damp stone. Outside, the sound of shod hooves on rock clattered dangerously close. Men's voices drifted down, rough, angry shouts. "See anything?" "Nah, just tracks. They went south. Check the ridge." Tahuya pressed Clara back against the stone wall. The ravine was so tight that his body was pressed against hers from chest to knee. He was a solid wall of heat. Clara froze. The proximity triggered a panic alarm in her brain. A man is pressing you against a wall. A man is too close. Her breath came in short, jagged gasps. She began to tremble, a violent shaking that she could not control. Tahuya felt it. He pulled back an inch, just enough to break the full contact, but there was nowhere to go. He looked down at her in the gloom. He saw the terror in her eyes, not of the men outside, but of him. He raised his hands. He did not touch her. He placed his palms flat against the rock wall on either side of her head, creating a cage that was also a shelter. He took his own weight, ensuring he did not lean on her. "Look at me," he whispered. The command was barely audible. Clara looked up. His face was inches from hers. "I am Tahuya," he said. "I am not him." The words cut through the haze of her memory. Clara nodded, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. I know. Breathe." He said, "Quiet." Like the deer. He waited. He did not move. He did not take advantage of her fear or her closeness. He simply held the space, his body a shield between her and the patrol, his restraint a promise. Slowly, the panic receded. Clara's breathing slowed. She became aware of him in a new way. She felt the heat radiating from his chest. She smelled the dust and the leather. She saw the pulse beating in the hollow of his throat. The voices outside faded. The hoofbeats retreated. But they did not move. The intimacy of the moment shifted. It changed from a necessity of survival into something charged and electric. Clara realized that for the first time in her life, she was pressed against a man and she was not afraid. She was safe. And in that safety, a door opened. She looked at his mouth. She wondered, with a sudden, shocking intensity, what it would feel like to be touched by hands that did not want to hurt. Tahuya watched her eyes. He saw the change. He saw the fear dissolve into curiosity, into desire. He leaned in, just a fraction. It was a question. Clara did not pull away. She exhaled, a long, shaky breath that ghosted across his lips. He did not kiss her. He brought his forehead to rest against hers. It was a gesture of immense intimacy, a sharing of breath and thought. "You are safe," he whispered. "I know," she answered. And for the first time, she believed it. They stayed like that for an hour, until the moon moved and the danger was truly gone. When they finally stepped out of the ravine, Clara's legs were steady. She checked the load of the revolver at her hip. She felt different. She felt like iron that had been tempered. They rejoined the band at the rallying point near dawn. The mood in the camp was grim. The scouts, Red Hawk and a boy named Kills in Silence, had returned with news. They stood before Tahuya, their faces streaked with mud for camouflage. "We saw the wagon," Red Hawk reported. "It is big. 6 horses. "Who rides with him?" Tahuya asked. 12 men, Red Hawk said. "Hired guns. Hard men. They carry the new rifles. And the White Wolf, he is there. He wears a black coat. He stops at the settlements. He puts up papers." "Papers?" Red Hawk reached into his belt and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He handed it to Tahuya. Tahuya looked at it, but he could not read the English words. He handed it to Clara. "What does it say?" he asked. Clara smoothed the paper. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady. It was a wanted poster, but not for a criminal. "Stolen," she read aloud. "My beloved daughter, Clara Whitlow, and her young relation, taken by savage Comanche raiders near Cinder Ridge. A reward of $500 for their return. A reward of $1,000 for the head of the savage leader. Help a grieving father restore his family." Clara lowered the paper. The lie was so bold, so perfectly crafted. It was breathtaking. He was playing the grieving father. He was using her absence to build his legend, to rally sympathy, to justify a slaughter. "He calls you beloved," Tahuya said, his voice dripping with acid. "He calls me property," Clara corrected. "He wants the boy back because the boy is proof of his sin. If I speak to the law, if I tell a judge, he hangs. He needs to silence me." She looked at the men gathered around. "He will not stop." Clara said, "He has 12 men now. Next week he will have 20. He will burn every camp until he finds me." Tahuya looked at the crumpled paper. He looked at the horizon where the sun was rising, bloody and red. "He profited from our deaths for years." Tahuya said, "He sold the guns that killed my brother. He sold the whiskey that poisoned my cousin. Now he hunts us under the cover of a lie." He turned to the band. "We can run," he said. "We can go deep into the Llano Estacado. We can hide in the dry places where the white men die of thirst." He paused. "Or we can stop running." Stonehand, who had argued to leave Clara behind, stepped forward. He looked at the poster, then at Clara. "Does he have the gold?" Stonehand asked. "The gold he took from the wagon?" Clara nodded. "He never leaves it. It is in a strong box under the seat." Stonehand spat on the ground. $1,000 for a head. How much for a liar? Tahuya looked at Clara. It was her choice. He would not say it. But she knew. If they fought, men would die. If they ran, they might live. But the shadow would never lift. "We ride," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to the edge of the circle. "We ride to him." Tahuya nodded. It was the only answer. "Prepare," he ordered. "We do not hunt rabbit today. We hunt the wolf." The camp moved with a cold, deadly purpose. Weapons were checked. Faces were painted. There was no wailing, no fear. There was only the hard, bright clarity of justice. Clara mounted the horse Tahuya had assigned to her. She checked the revolver. She pulled Davy up behind her, tying him fast. Tahuya rode up beside her. His face was painted with black stripes, the color of death, the color of the night. "Stay close to me," he said. "I will," Clara said. They turned their horses south, back toward the settlements, back toward the danger. They were riding into the teeth of the storm. But as Clara looked at Tahuya's broad back, she realized she was no longer the leaf blown by the wind. She was part of the storm. The trail south was a scar upon the earth, washed out by the sudden violence of the autumn storms that battered the high plains. The sky turned the color of a bruised plum, hanging low and heavy over the riders as they pushed through the scrubland. Rain did not fall here as a blessing. It fell as a punishment. Cold sheets of water that turned the dust into a clinging, clay-like mud that sucked at the horses' hooves and chilled the riders to the bone. Clara Whitlow rode near the front of the column, her head bowed against the wind, her hat pulled low. The water dripped from the brim, running in icy rivulets down her neck. But she did not complain. She had ceased to be the woman who flinched at loud noises in the parlor. The saddle had become her home. The rhythm of the horse, her clock. Tahuya rode beside her, his body moving in perfect synchronization with his mount. He checked on her constantly, though his gaze was never lingering or oppressive. It was a sweep of the eyes, a quick assessment of her posture, the color of her cheeks, the way she held the reins. "The going is hard," Tahuya said, his voice barely audible over the drumming of the rain. "We can stop. There is a shelter of rock 2 miles east." Clara looked up. Her face was pale, washed clean of the trail dust by the storm, but her eyes were flint. "Does he stop?" she asked. Tahuya shook his head. "The white wolf does not stop. He has fresh horses and men who fear him. Then neither do we." Clara said, "I will not let him gain ground while I rest." Tahuya studied her for a moment, rain slicking his braided hair. He nodded, a gesture of respect that warmed Clara more than a fire could have. "Drink," he said, handing her a flask. "It is not much, but it cuts the cold." She took it. It was a raw spirit, traded from Comancheros weeks ago. It burned her throat and settled hot in her stomach. She handed it back, their fingers brushing against the wet leather. "I am fine." "Tahuya," she said. "I know," he replied. "But the boy is cold." Clara looked back. Davy was strapped to her back, covered by the heavy buffalo robe Tahuya had given her. He was asleep, lulled by the motion. But Tahuya was right. The cold was a thief. "We will stop at the crossing," Clara conceded. "For an hour, to warm the child." Tahuya signaled the halt with a sharp whistle that cut through the wind. The band slowed, the horses blowing hard, steam rising from their flanks like smoke. As they dismounted near a grove of twisted cottonwoods, the emotional weight of the journey settled on Clara. Every mile south was a mile closer to Elias. Every mile was a mile back toward the cage she had escaped. The dread was a physical sickness in her gut. She could almost smell the tobacco and bay rum scent of him, could almost feel the suffocating pressure of his presence in a room. She sat on a log, shielding Davy from the drizzle, her hands trembling slightly. It was not the cold. It was the guilt. She was leading these people, Tahuya, Stonehand, Graygrass, into the line of fire. They were risking extinction for her. "You carry a stone in your heart," Tahuya said. He was standing over her, holding a piece of dried meat. "I bring you death," Clara whispered. "You should have left me." Tahuya crouched down. He did not touch her, but his presence was a shelter. Death walks with us always, he said. It is the shadow of the hawk. It is the tooth of the winter. You did not bring it. You only gave it a name. But this is not your war, Clara insisted. Elias hates you, but he hunts me. It is my war, Tahuya said, his voice hard. A man who eats the spirit of a child is an enemy to all people. If a wolf comes into the camp and takes a lamb, do we say it is the lamb's war? No, we kill the wolf. He offered her the meat. Eat. Guilt is a poor fuel. It burns hot but leaves only ash. Clara took the food. She looked at him, at the dark eyes that saw so much and judged so little. Thank you, she said. Ask before you thank, Tahuya said gently. We are not done yet. The rain broke on the third day, leaving the world scoured and bright. The air smelled of wet sage and ozone. They crested a ridge and looked down into a shallow valley. And Tahuya raised a hand to halt the column. Below them, struggling through the mud of the valley floor, was a caravan. It was not a military patrol, nor a rich trade train. It was a ragged collection of wagons, hand carts, and walking figures. They are the broken ones, Red Hawk said, spitting on the ground. Clara squinted against the glare. She saw a mule pulling a cart piled high with furniture. She saw women walking with bundles on their heads. She saw men pushing wheelbarrows. Who are they? She asked. People with no land, Tahuya said. The army moves them. The banks move them. They are like the tumbleweed. They rode down slowly, weapons sheathed but hands near them. The caravan stopped as the Comanche approached. Fear rippled through the group below. Men reached for old shotguns. Women pulled children behind their skirts. Tahuya held up a hand. Palm out. Peace. The leader of the caravan stepped forward. He was a black man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a coat that had been patched so many times the original fabric was lost. He held a rusted rifle, but he did not raise it. We have nothing for you to take, the man said. His voice was deep, weary. Unless you want sickness and debt, we do not rob the poor, Tahuya said in English. We seek news. The man relaxed slightly. He looked at Tahuya, then at Clara. His eyes lingered on her, a white woman riding with Comanche, carrying a child, armed with a revolver. There was no judgment in his face, only a recognition of another survivor. I am Silas, the man said. We come from the east. Share our fire. We have beans. Not much else. Tahuya nodded. They made a temporary camp alongside the caravan. It was a strange meeting of worlds. The Comanche, disciplined and fierce, mingled with the ragtag group of displaced families. There were Mexican vaqueros who had lost their work when the big cattle companies fenced the range. There were poor white sharecroppers driven off by drought. There were freedmen like Silas, walking west in search of a place where the law might be colorblind. Clara walked among them. She saw a Mexican woman nursing a baby under a wagon. She saw a white grandfather sharing tobacco with Stonehand. She sat by Silas's fire as the sun went down. You running too? Miss? Silas asked, stirring a pot of watery beans. Yes, Clara said. I am running from a man who thinks he owns the world. Silas chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Plenty of those men about. They draw lines on paper and call it law. They put up fences and call it progress. Me and my kin. We tried to farm near the Brazos. A company man came with a piece of paper, said the land belonged to the railroad now. Sheriff came the next day with a torch. He looked at Clara. The law's a hammer. Miss, it only works for the hand that holds it. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Elias was the hand that held the hammer in Cinder Ridge. Did you see a man? Clara asked. A trader, tall, rides with armed men. Silas nodded slowly. We saw him. 2 days back. Passed us on the road like we was dirt. Big black horse. He stopped at the trading post in Bitter Creek, pasting up papers. Papers. Wanted posters. Silas said, but not for a thief, for a daughter. Clara closed her eyes. He offers a lot of money. Silas continued quietly. $500. That is a lifetime of wages for a man like me. He looked at Tahuya, who was checking the horses nearby. Some of the men in my group, they talked about it. $500 buys a farm. It buys freedom. Clara's hand drifted to her gun. Silas saw the movement. He shook his head. Don't worry, miss. We know what it is to be hunted. We ain't selling you out. Money that comes from blood don't spend right. It curses the ground. Clara looked at this man, who had nothing, who had been burned out and driven off, and who still held on to a code of honor that Elias would never understand. Thank you, Silas, she said. He is heading for the canyon pass. Silas said, he thinks you will try to cross into the territory. He has men watching the water holes. Clara stood up. She had to tell Tahuya. As she walked back to their side of the camp, she realized something profound. The prejudice she had been taught, that the Comanche were savages, that the blacks were simple, that the Mexicans were lazy, was a lie constructed to justify the theft of the land and the labor of others. Elias and men like him needed these lies. They needed to make people less than human so they could use them. Clara Whitlow was done with lies. The band moved out the next morning, leaving the caravan behind. The goodbye was quiet. Tahuya gave Silas a haunch of venison. Silas gave Tahuya a pouch of tobacco. They rode for the canyon pass Silas had mentioned. It was dangerous terrain, a maze of red rock and deep shadows, but it offered water. They reached the spring at twilight. It was a hidden oasis, a pool of black water fed by a seep in the canyon wall, surrounded by ferns and moss that seemed impossible in the desert heat. The band made camp, but the mood was tense. They were close now. Elias was near. Tahuya approached Clara where she sat by the water, washing the dust from her face. The scouts say the pass is clear, he said, but we must be careful. Clara nodded. She wiped her face with her sleeve. Silas told me something. She said, he said the law is a hammer. He is wise, Tahuya said. He sat down on a flat rock near her. Clara looked at the water. I never wanted to be an outlaw. Tahuya, I wanted a garden. I wanted a house with windows that locked from the inside. I wanted to teach my son to read. That is not asking for much, Tahuya said. It feels like asking for the moon, Clara replied. Tahuya picked up a pebble and skipped it across the dark water. It made 3 small ripples before sinking. I wanted to be a horsebreaker, he said softly. Before the wars, before the Texas Rangers burned my father's village, I liked the horses. They are honest. If they bite you, it is because they are afraid, not because they are cruel. He looked at his hands, scarred and rough. Now I'm a war chief. I lead men to kill. I wake up in the night and I smell blood. I fear that one day I will not be able to wash it off. I fear I will become like the wolf we hunt, hard, cold, empty. Clara turned to him. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, revealing the exhaustion etched there. He was not a myth. He was a man, tired of the weight he carried. You are not him, she said fiercely. How do you know? Tahuya asked. I have killed many men. Because you ask. Clara said. Elias never asks. He takes. You ask. You stopped for the child. You gave Silas meat. You are not empty. Tahuya, you are full of grief. Yes, but that means you are still human. She reached out. It was a bold move, terrifying in its implications. She placed her hand over his, covering the scars. He went still. He looked at her hand, pale against his dark skin. He turned his palm upward, interlacing his fingers with hers. The grip was strong, warm, and desperate. I do not want to be a memory, Tahuya whispered. You are real, Clara said. You are here. The air between them changed. It was no longer the charged, frantic energy of the ravine. It was slower, deeper. It was the heavy, sweet gravity of 2 planets finding an orbit. Clara leaned forward. Tahuya met her. He did not grab her. He waited until the very last second, giving her the space to pull back, the space to choose. She chose. She pressed her forehead against his, then tilted her face up. His lips were dry and warm. The kiss was not the ravishing of a romance novel. It was a question asked and answered. It tasted of salt and water and the terrifying hope of the future. He wrapped his arm around her waist. pulling her closer. But his touch remained careful, almost reverent. He held her as if she were made of glass that he was terrified to shatter, yet knowing she was made of steel. "I see you, Clara Whitlow," he murmured against her mouth. "I see you." "Tahuya," she answered. They sat there for a long time, the darkness of the canyon holding them in a private world, for an hour. There was no Elias, no army, no wanted posters. There was only the sound of the water and the beat of two hearts that had decided to beat in time, but the world outside did not stop. The sound of a horse scrambling over rock broke the silence. Clara pulled back, her hand instantly going to her revolver. Tahuya was on his feet in a blur of motion, his knife drawn. It was kills in silence. The scout slid from his horse, his face grim. "Tahuya," he said, breathless. "News. From the town?" "Speak," Tahuya commanded, though he did not sheath his knife. "The White Wolf is not just hunting," the boy said. "He has gone to the sheriff in Tascosa. He has sworn a warrant." "A warrant?" Clara asked, stepping forward. "For what?" The boy looked at her, then at the ground. "He says you are a thief," the boy said. "He says you stole $500 in gold from his wagon, and he says you stole the child." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Stole the child?" she whispered. "Davy is mine. The paper says the child belongs to him." Kills in Silence said. "It says you are the nursemaid who ran off with the master's son. It says you are unstable, that the savages turned your mind. The cruelty of it was a masterpiece. Elias had taken the truth and inverted it. He had turned her victimization into a crime. He had turned her motherhood into kidnapping. He had stripped her of her credibility before she could ever open her mouth in a courtroom. "If the sheriff catches you," Kills in Silence added, "he has orders to hang the men and return the woman and child to Mr. Whitlow." Clara felt a wave of nausea. The law. He was using the law. The sheriff would not listen to a woman who had been living with Comanche. He would listen to the respected trader, the lay preacher, the grieving father. Clara looked at Tahuya. The tenderness of the last hour was gone, replaced by a cold, hard rage. "He closes the door," Clara said, her voice shaking with fury. "He makes sure I have nowhere to go. No court will hear me. No town will take me. He boxes us in." Tahuya said, "He wants us to fight the sheriff. If we kill a lawman, the whole army comes. He uses the badge as a shield." Clara said, "He is a coward." Tahuya sheathed his knife with a vicious snap. "A shield only protects the front," he said. He turned to the fire, kicking a log into the flames. Sparks flew up into the dark. "We cannot fight the sheriff," Tahuya said, "and we cannot fight the army. So we must not fight them." "How?" Clara asked. "We make him come out," Tahuya said. "We make the wolf leave the pack." He looked at Clara. "He wants you, we will give him you." Clara froze. "What?" "Not really," Tahuya said, his eyes glittering with a dangerous light. "We give him the story he wants. We send word. We say the woman is weak. She is slowing us down. We say we will trade her back for the gold he owes us." "He will believe it?" Clara asked. "He believes everyone is like him," Tahuya said. "He believes everything is for sale. He thinks I am a savage who wants whiskey and gold. So I will be that savage." He stepped closer to her. "We lure him away from the sheriff. We lure him away from the guns. We bring him to a place where his papers do not matter." "And then?" Clara asked. "Then we kill him," Tahuya said. The plan was madness. It relied on Elias's arrogance. It relied on his belief that Clara was nothing more than a broken object and that Tahuya was nothing more than a greedy raider. But as Clara looked at Tahuya, she realized it was the only way. The law was a weapon she could not hold. The truth was a language Elias spoke better than she did. Violence was the only currency left. "I will do it," Clara said. "I will write the note. You will tell him I am cruel," Tahuya said. "Tell him I beat you. Tell him I am tired of your crying. Make him feel powerful." Clara nodded. She knew how to do that. She had done it for 10 years. "I will make him come," she said. The wind picked up again, whistling through the canyon. It sounded like a mourning song, or perhaps a war cry. Clara reached out and took Tahuya's hand one last time before they turned to the business of death. "We end this," she said. "Yes," Tahuya replied. "We end it, or it ends us." They stood together in the dark, the water of the spring black as ink beside them, the future rushing toward them like a falling rock. Clara Whitlow was no longer running. She was waiting, and the wolf was coming to the trap. Blackwood's Crossing was a scab on the landscape of the territory, a collection of rough-hewn timber buildings huddled near a muddy tributary where the cattle trails intersected with the freight roads. It was a place where men traded furs for whiskey, where silence was the common currency, and where the law was often decided by who drew iron the fastest. On this particular afternoon, the air hung heavy and yellow, thick with dust and the impending threat of a storm that refused to break. The wind kicked up eddies of grit that danced across the hard-packed earth between the saloon and the general store. Clara Whitlow sat on her horse at the edge of the scrub, hidden by a stand of mesquite. Her heart felt like a trapped bird battering itself against her ribs. Beside her, Tahuya sat motionless, his face painted with the black stripes of war, his eyes fixed on the outpost below. "He is there," Tahuya said quietly. Clara followed his gaze. A large wagon, the wood polished and dark, stood near the hitching rail of the trading post. 6 horses were tethered nearby, big, grain-fed mounts that spoke of money and power. Men in dusters leaned against the porch posts, their hands resting casually near their holsters. They were not settlers. They were hired guns, men with hard eyes and no allegiance beyond the coin in their pockets. And there, stepping out of the shadowed doorway of the post, was Elias. He wore a long black coat, immaculate despite the dust. He adjusted his hat, looking around with the proprietary air of a man who believed the earth existed solely to support his boots. "He waits for the savage," Tahuya said. "He expects to trade gold for a broken woman. He expects me to be cowering," Clara whispered. "He expects shame to keep my mouth shut." "Shame is a collar," Tahuya said, turning to look at her. "Do you wear it today?" Clara gripped the reins until her knuckles turned white. She thought of the nights in the locked room. She thought of Davy, safe back at the hidden camp with gray grass. She thought of the lies Elias had pasted on every wall from here to the Brazos. "No," she said, "I wear nothing of his." Tahuya signaled to the men behind them. The band had split into 2 groups. Stonehand and the younger warriors were circling the perimeter to cut off escape. Tahuya, Clara, and the seasoned fighters would ride straight down the center. It was not a raid. It was an execution of justice. "Let us go," Tahuya commanded. They rode out of the cover and down the slope. They did not charge with war whoops and firing guns. They walked their horses down the main street of Blackwood's Crossing, a silent, terrifying procession of armed men. The activity at the outpost froze. A blacksmith dropped his hammer. A woman hanging laundry stopped with a sheet halfway to the line. The hired guns on the porch straightened, hands hovering over their weapons, but they did not draw. They counted the riders. They saw the rifles resting across the saddles. They saw the discipline. Elias looked up. He saw the Comanche. He saw the leader with the black paint. And then he saw Clara. For a moment, his mask slipped. A flash of genuine shock crossed his face, not because she was alive, but because she was riding upright. She was not bound. She was not weeping. She was looking at him from the back of a horse, a revolver at her hip, flanked by the very men he had paid to have exterminated. Tahuya halted the band 10 paces from the porch, the silence stretched tight as a bowstring. Elias recovered quickly. He stepped down from the porch, moving into the sunlight. He spread his hands, a gesture of benevolence that made Clara's stomach turn. "Clara," he called out, his voice rich with practiced relief. "Praise be, you are alive." He took a step forward, ignoring the armed warriors as if they were nothing more than scenery. "Come down, child," Elias said. "You are safe now. I have brought the ransom. I have brought men to escort you home. The nightmare is over." Clara did not move. She sat high in the saddle, looking down at the man who had defined her world for 12 years. It is not a nightmare. Elias, Clara said. Her voice shook, a tremor she hated, but the words were clear. It is the first time I have been awake. Elias's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before he pasted it back on. He looked at the crowd that had gathered. Trappers, store clerks, a few travelers. He needed an audience. He needed the narrative. The savages have turned your mind, he said, his tone dropping to a sad, pitying register. We know what they do to white women. They drug them. They twist their thoughts with heathen magics. You are not yourself. Clara, you are sick. I am not sick, Clara said. You are confused, Elias shouted, his voice rising to reach the onlookers. Look at you, dressed in rags, riding with murderers. Come down. Clara, think of the boy. Think of your little cousin. Where is he? Have they sold him? Have they killed him? He is safe, Clara said. He is where you cannot touch him. Elias's eyes narrowed. The mention of the boy sharpened his focus. He needed the child. The child was the proof. The child was the loose end. Gentlemen, Elias said, turning to the crowd and his hired guns. You see what we deal with. A woman driven mad by captivity. She does not know her own father. He is not my father, Clara screamed. The sheer volume of it cracked the air. The crowd murmured. A woman standing near the water trough put a hand to her mouth. Elias sighed, shaking his head. See? Unstable. A tragedy. He turned back to Clara, his voice hardening. Get down off that horse. Clara, now! Before these men have to use force to rescue you. Clara looked at Tahuya. He gave a barely perceptible nod. She swung her leg over the saddle and dropped to the ground. Her boots hit the dust with a thud. Her knees felt like water, but she locked them. She walked forward until she was 5 paces from Elias. She could smell him now. The bay rum, the sweat, the stale tobacco. It was the scent of her fear, but she was not in the house. She was in the street, under the open sky. I am not coming with you. Elias, she said. Elias laughed. A harsh, barking sound. Don't be foolish. The sheriff has a warrant. You are a runaway. You stole my property. You stole my gold. I took what was mine, Clara said. And I took the child to save him from you, from me. Elias looked around the crowd, playing to the gallery. I have clothed you. I have fed you. I have raised you since your mother passed. And this is my reward? Slander from a girl who's been sleeping in a teepee. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear, Shut your mouth, girl. Get in the wagon, or I will have these men kill every savage here. And I will take the boy, and I will make you watch what happens to him. The threat was the catalyst. It was the same threat he had used for years. Do what I say, or I will hurt something you love. But Clara had nothing left to lose but the truth. She stepped back, raising her voice so it carried to the back of the crowd. He threatens me, she shouted, just as he threatened me in the kitchen, just as he threatened me when he locked me in the cellar. She turned to the crowd. She saw the faces, skeptical men, frightened women. She had to make them see. He says I stole the child. Clara cried out. He says Davy is my relation, my cousin. She took a breath that felt like inhaling fire. Davy is not my cousin. The crowd went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Davy is my son, Clara declared. Elias's face went purple. She lies. The heathens have shamed her and she tries to cover it. He is my son, Clara shouted over him. And this man who calls himself a preacher, this man who stands in the church and reads the Psalms. She pointed a shaking finger at Elias. He is the father. The accusation landed like a physical blow. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence born of a taboo so deep, so reviled, that the mind recoiled from it. Elias stood frozen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He used me for offspring, Clara screamed, the tears finally spilling over. Hot and angry. Since I was 15, he used me. And when the baby came, he hid us. He threatened to kill us if I spoke. He called it God's will. She turned to the women in the crowd. She looked at the woman by the trough, at the washerwoman, at the trader's wife on the porch. Look at him, Clara pleaded. You know what happens in the dark houses? You know the look of a man who eats his own? The washerwoman slowly lowered her basket. She looked at Elias. She looked at Clara, and then she took a step forward. She did not speak, but she nodded. It was a tiny movement, but it was an earthquake. Another woman, a bonneted settler's wife, crossed her arms and stared at Elias with cold, hard eyes. The men were shifting uncomfortably. They wanted to dismiss it. They wanted to believe the respected trader, but the raw, jagged edges of Clara's voice were too real. The hysteria, Elias claimed, wasn't madness. It was trauma. Elias saw the turn. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the blacksmith. He saw the disgust in the faces of the women. He lost his temper. The mask disintegrated completely. "You slut!" Elias roared. "You ungrateful, lying whore! You lay with these savages and now you try to pin your sin on me?" He lunged for her. Tahuya moved. He urged his horse forward, placing the animal between Clara and Elias. He looked down at the trader, his face a mask of stone. "Stand back, wolf," Tahuya said. Elias stumbled back, his hand going to his coat. "This is white man's business," Elias snarled. "It is the business of men," Tahuya said. "And you are not a man." Tahuya looked at the hired guns on the porch. "This man pays you with gold he got from selling rifles to the Apache," Tahuya announced. "He sells the guns that kill your families. He sells the schedules of the army patrols. He is a traitor to his own flag." The hired guns glanced at each other. They were mercenaries, but they were Texans. Selling guns to the tribes was a hanging offense. "That's a lie," Elias screamed. "Check the wagon," Clara shouted. "Under the seat, the strong box. It is full of Mexican gold." The leader of the hired guns, a man with a scar on his cheek, looked at Elias. He looked at the wagon. "Step away from the wagon, Mr. Whitlow," the gunman said. "Let's have a look." "No!" Elias panicked. "You work for me. Kill them. Kill the savages." He drew his revolver. It was a foolish, desperate motion. He was surrounded by men who lived by the gun. But his rage, his need to silence the truth, blinded him. He raised the pistol, aiming not at Tahuya, but at Clara. He would rather kill her than let her speak. "Drop it," Tahuya shouted. Elias cocked the hammer. The sound of the shot was deafening. It did not come from Elias. Tahuya had drawn his Colt with a speed that blurred the eye. He fired once. The bullet struck Elias in the center of the chest. The impact lifted him off his feet. He slammed into the dust, his own gun discharging harmlessly into the sky. He lay there, gasping, his hands clutching at his blood-soaked shirt. The black coat turned slick and shiny. The hired guns had drawn their weapons, but they did not fire. They saw Tahuya hold his fire after the single shot. They saw the Comanche warriors watching them, arrows nocked but not loose. It was a standoff. He drew first. The gunman with the scar said quietly, "I saw it." Tahuya kept his gun trained on the body, but he did not shoot again. He looked at the gunman. "We want only the wolf," Tahuya said. "The rest of you can live." The gunman looked at Elias, who was twitching in the dirt, the life rattling out of him. He looked at the gold in the wagon. He looked at Clara, who was standing over her stepfather, trembling violently. "We're done here," the gunman said. He holstered his pistol. Elias Whitlow looked up. His eyes found Clara. There was no repentance in them, only a hateful, confused glare. He tried to speak, perhaps to curse her one last time, but his mouth filled with blood. He shuddered once, and then he was still. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of a storm that had passed, leaving wreckage in its wake. Clara stared at the body. She waited for the grief. She waited for the relief. But there was only a vast, hollow numbness. He was dead. The monster was just meat. She looked at Tahuya. He was holstering his gun, his face gray beneath the war paint. He did not look triumphant. He looked sick. Clara walked over to him. She reached up and touched his boot. "It is done," she whispered. Tahuya looked down at her. "Is it?" The fallout began immediately. The store owner came out, a shotgun in the crook of his arm. "You best ride," he said, his voice shaky. "The sheriff in Tascosa will hear the shots. He won't care who drew first. He'll only see a white man dead by an Indian bullet." He looked at Clara. "And you, "Miss, you best go with them. There's no place for you here, not after what you said. Folk don't like hearing the devil lives next door." It was a bitter truth. Clara had exposed the rot, but society preferred the painted surface. She was a pariah now. The woman who slept with Comanche. The daughter who killed her father. "We ride," Tahuya commanded. He reached down and pulled Clara up behind him. She did not look back at the body of Elias Whitlow. She buried her face in Tahuya's back, smelling the sweat and the leather, and closed her eyes against the glare of the sun. They rode hard for the canyon, putting miles between themselves and the law. They did not stop until they reached the high ground, where the air was thin and cold. That night, the camp was quiet. There was no celebration. The death of Elias hung over them like a shroud. Clara sat by the fire, watching the flames. She felt scraped hollow. She had thought his death would fix her. She had thought it would return the years he had stolen, but the years were gone. The innocence was gone. Tahuya sat across from her. He was cleaning his gun, dismantling it with mechanical precision. "You are quiet," he said. "I feel heavy," Clara admitted. "You carry the ghost." Tahuya said, "When you kill a man, you carry him for a while. It is the cost." "I didn't kill him," Clara said. "You did. I was the hand." Tahuya said, "You were the will." He reassembled the cylinder, the metal clicking softly. "I feared this," Tahuya said, looking at his hands. "I feared I would become a killer of men who cannot fight back." "He could fight," Clara said fiercely. "He had a gun. He had 12 men. He had the law. He was not helpless. Tahuya, he was a predator. But I killed him in anger." Tahuya said, "I did not kill him for the tribe. I killed him because he looked at you with hate. I killed him because I wanted him dead." He looked up at her, his eyes full of torment. "Does that make me a wolf?" Clara moved around the fire. She sat beside him. She took the gun from his hands and set it on the ground. She took his hands in hers. "No," she said. "A wolf kills to eat. A wolf kills because it is his nature. You killed to save." She pressed his hands against her cheek. "You saved me, Tahuya." "You saved Davy. You saved the women he would have hurt next. Protecting life sometimes requires ending a predator's power. That is not sin. That is duty." Tahuya leaned into her touch. He closed his eyes. "I am tired of death." "Clara," he whispered. "Then let us choose life," she said. She pulled him closer, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. They sat together in the darkness, two outcasts under a vast, indifferent sky. The sheriff would come. The soldiers would come. The rumors would spread. But Elias was dead, and for the first time in her life. Clara Whitlow held the future in her own hands. It was a terrifying, fragile thing, but it was hers. The death of Elias Whitlow did not bring silence. It brought a storm. The gunshot that ended his life in the dust of Blackwood's Crossing echoed across the territory, transforming instantly from a moment of justice into a cry for war. To the settlers, the story was simple and terrifying. A respected trader and man of God had been gunned down by savages who had corrupted his daughter. The truth, that he was a predator who had fed on his own blood, was too dark, too complicated, and too ugly to be believed by a world that needed clear lines between civilization and the wild. The band rode north, pushing the horses to the brink of collapse. They knew what was coming. The sheriff in Tascosa would not ride alone. He would wire the fort. The cavalry would saddle their big grain-fed bays. The patrols would double. Clara rode with her head down, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She felt a strange, hollow vertigo. For 12 years, her life had been defined by the presence of Elias. He was the wall she hit, the ceiling that pressed down on her, the floor that shifted under her feet. Now, he was gone. The cage door was open. But freedom, she discovered, was not a sudden burst of light. It was a terrifying vastness. She felt exposed, without the constant anticipation of pain. Her nerves jangled, looking for a threat that was no longer there. She woke in the saddle with a start, her heart hammering, expecting his heavy hand on her shoulder. only to find the empty horizon and the steady back of Tahuya riding ahead of her. They reached the high country as the first snow began to fall. It was early, a bitter promise of a hard winter. The world turned gray and white, the sky pressing down low and leaden. "We cannot go to the main camp," Tahuya told the council one evening, their breath pluming in the freezing air. "The soldiers will look for big fires. They will look for the summer gathering places. We must disappear." So they went into the ghost lands, the broken canyons and badlands where the wind howled through rock chimneys and the water froze in the skins. The winter was a hammer that struck them again and again. Game was scarce. The buffalo had moved south, and the deer were skittish ghosts in the timber. Hunger became a constant companion, a dull ache in the belly that never fully went away. Clara learned what it meant to endure. In the settlement, endurance had been passive, taking the blow, holding the tongue. Here, endurance was active. It was scraping the last bits of flesh from a frozen hide with numb fingers. It was gathering wood in a blizzard. It was chewing on boiled leather to trick the stomach. And yet, in this crucible of cold, something miraculous happened. Davy thrived. The boy, who had been a shadow in Elias's house, a secret kept in the dark, blossomed in the harsh light of the camp. He was no longer the shameful evidence of a crime. He was a child of the band. Clara watched from the entrance of the lodge as gray grass taught Davy how to make a snare from sinew. She saw Stonehand, the warrior who had once wanted to leave them behind, lift Davy onto his shoulders to reach a high branch. "He has the eyes of a hawk," Stonehand said, catching Clara watching. "He sees the rabbit before it moves." "He is small," Clara said, the old apology rising to her lips. "The pine nut is small." Stonehand grunted, "But it holds the tree inside." This acceptance was not universal. However, the pressure of the pursuit and the gnawing hunger brought old cracks to the surface. One night, as the wind screamed outside, a younger warrior named Broken Tree spoke up near the fire. He was gaunt, his face sharp with famine. "We starve because we carry bad luck," Broken Tree said, casting a dark look at Clara. "The white woman brings the soldiers. The wolf is dead, but his ghost hunts us. Why do we keep her? Why do we keep the half-blood child?" The lodge went silent. The accusation hung in the smoky air. It was the fear speaking, the ancient terror of a people who had seen their world shrink year by year. Clara felt the familiar cold dread. She waited for Tahuya to speak, to defend her as he had before. But Tahuya remained silent. He sat looking into the fire, his face unreadable. Clara realized then that he could not fight every battle for her. If she was to belong here, she had to claim her place. She could not be a pet or a charity case. She had to be a woman of the people. She stood up. The movement was stiff from the cold, but she straightened her spine. She walked to the center of the lodge, standing between Broken Tree and the fire. "I do not bring the soldiers," Clara said. Her voice was raspy from the smoke, but steady. "The soldiers come because they want the land. They want the gold. They want the water. If I leave tomorrow, they will still come." She looked Broken Tree in the eye. "You say I am bad luck. But who stitched your moccasins when the ice cut them? Who boiled the willow bark when your cough was deep?" She pointed to the corner where the dried meat was stored, a meager pile, but one she had helped process. "I work," Clara said. "I carry wood. I break ice. I do not eat until the child eats. I am not a white woman here. I am a pair of hands. I am a mother." She looked around the circle of faces, seeing the fatigue and the fear. "My stepfather tried to make me a nothing. He tried to make me a ghost. I will not let you do the same. I am Clara, and I stay because I am useful, and because I am free." Broken Tree stared at her. He looked for the weakness, the submissiveness he expected from a captive. He found only the hard edge of a survivor. He grunted and looked away. "The fire is low," he muttered. "Put more wood on it." It was not an apology, but it was a concession. The tension broke. Tahuya looked up at her, and the pride in his eyes was a warmth that touched her deeper than the fire. The winter dragged on. Rumors reached them from the few hardy traders who ventured into the Badlands. Men who traded ammunition for furs and asked no questions. They say the trader Whitlow was a saint. A trader named Frenchy told them, warming his hands over their fire. The papers in Denver say he was martyred trying to save his daughter from a war chief. They call it the Whitlow Massacre. The lie was spreading. It was becoming history. Elias was the hero, and Clara was the tragic victim, or worse, the corrupted woman who had turned on her own kind. "Let them talk," Tahuya said, throwing a stick into the flames. "The paper burns. The ink fades. The truth is what we live." But Clara saw the toll it took on him. Tahuya was a leader who carried the weight of every soul in the band. He spent his days patrolling the perimeter, watching the horizon for the dark line of cavalry. He grew thin, his cheekbones sharp as blades. He slept with his knife in his hand. He feared that by keeping her, he was dooming them all. When the Chinook winds finally blew in from the south, melting the snow into slush and waking the dormant grass, the band prepared to move. They had survived the winter, but the spring brought the soldiers back. Clara found Tahuya by the horses one morning. The sun was pale and watery, hinting at a warmth to come. "We cannot stay with the band," Clara said. Tahuya did not stop brushing the roan mare. "I know. If we stay, the soldiers will find the band," Clara continued. "They follow the legend of the Whitlow Massacre. They follow me." "And if you go?" Tahuya asked. "If I go, the band can slip away. They can join the Quahati on the staked plains. They can disappear." "And where will you go?" he asked. "Back to the settlements? To the rope?" "No," Clara said. "I go to the edge." She stepped closer to him. "There is a place Silas told me about. A valley in the canyon lands, where the red rock is steep and the water is hidden. It is too small for a tribe, too wild for a settler." Tahuya stopped brushing. He looked at the horizon. "It is a lonely life," he said. "No council fires, no dances, just the wind and the work." Clara took the brush from his hand. She laid her palm against the horse's warm flank. "I have been lonely in a house full of people," she said. "I have been lonely in a town. I would rather be lonely with you in the wild than crowded in a cage without you." Tahuya turned to her. He took her face in his hands. His thumbs traced the line of her jaw, the skin roughened by the winter wind. "I am a war chief," he said softly. "I do not know how to be a husband. I do not know how to build a peace. Then we learn." Clara said, "We learn together." They left 3 days later. The parting was not sad. It was necessary. Gray Grass wept openly, hugging Davy and tucking a medicine bag into his shirt. Stonehand gave Tahuya a new rifle, a repeater taken from a supply train. "Ride far, brother," Stonehand said, "and watch the sky." Clara and Tahuya, with Davy riding between them on a pony, turned west. They rode away from the band, away from the only safety Clara had known since her escape, and into the vast indifference of the frontier. They found the canyon Silas had described. It was a gash in the earth, hidden by twisting labyrinths of stone. There was a spring, sweet and cold, and a grove of cottonwoods that offered shade. They built a life. It was not the romance of the storybooks. It was hard, grinding labor. They built a shelter of stone and timber. They hunted for every meal. They fought the coyotes for their small flock of goats. They watched the sky for dust. But in the evenings, when the work was done and the fire was lit, there was a peace that Clara had never imagined existed. The turning point, the moment Clara finally put the ghost of Elias in the ground for good, came on a warm night in early summer. The air was thick with the scent of blooming sage. Davy was asleep in the shelter, his breathing a soft rhythm in the quiet. Clara sat by the fire, braiding her hair. Tahuya sat opposite her, mending a bridle. He watched her. The firelight played across her skin, softening the hard angles the winter had carved. Clara looked up and met his gaze. For months, their intimacy had been a quiet thing, a touch on the arm, a shared warmth under the buffalo robe. Tahuya had never pushed. He had never demanded. He treated her body as a sovereign territory that only she could open. Tonight, the look in his eyes was different. It was open. It was hungry. But it was the hunger of a man who asks. not a man who takes. Clara stopped braiding. She let her hair fall loose around her shoulders. She thought of the bedroom in Cinder Ridge, the lock turning, the heavy footsteps, the crushing weight of a man who used her to prove his own power. She looked at Tahuya. He was waiting. Clara stood up. She walked around the fire. She stood before him. She reached out and took the bridle from his hands. Setting it aside, Tahuya looked up at her. "Clara, I am not afraid," she said. It was the truth. The fear was gone. In its place was a fierce, bright desire to be known, to be touched not as a victim, not as a vessel, but as a woman who chose her own joy. She took his hand and placed it on her waist. "Touch me," she whispered. Tahuya stood slowly. He towered over her, but he made himself small in his touch. He ran his hands down her arms, learning the shape of her. He kissed her, and it was not the kiss of a conqueror. It was the kiss of a pilgrim reaching a holy place. They moved to the buffalo robe spread beneath the cottonwoods. The stars wheeled overhead, a billion witnesses to a moment of absolute reclamation. When they came together, Clara did not close her eyes. She kept them open. She watched him. She saw the tenderness in his face. She felt the strength of his body, controlled and given freely. She cried, but they were not tears of pain. They were the tears of a dam breaking. The shame that Elias had planted in her, the deep, rotting belief that her body was a site of sin, was washed away. She was not dirty. She was not broken. She was alive, and she was loved. In the morning, the world looked different. The colors were sharper. The air tasted sweeter. Clara walked to the stream to wash. Tahuya was already there, filling the water skins. He looked up as she approached. He did not look away. He smiled, a rare, full smile that cracked his stoic face wide open. "Good morning, Clara," he said. "Good morning, Tahuya," she replied. She walked to him and kissed him in the bright light of day. It was a seal on the night's promise. Years passed. The world outside their canyon changed. The Indian Wars ground to their bloody conclusion. The buffalo vanished, replaced by cattle. The fences went up. The railroad cut the territory in half, but the canyon remained. News trickled in slowly. They heard that the trading post at Blackwood's Crossing had burned down a year after Elias died. They heard that without his network of bribes and double-dealing, his empire had crumbled into bankruptcy. The name Whitlow became a cautionary tale of greed, whispered about in saloons. But another story whispered too. Women in the settlements. Women who bore the bruises of angry husbands. Girls who flinched at the sound of heavy boots told a story of a woman who ran. A woman who stood up in the dust and spoke the truth that no one wanted to hear. They whispered that she had found a warrior who treated her like a queen. They whispered that it was possible to survive. Clara knew none of this. She only knew the life she had built. The story ends on a morning in late autumn, 5 years after the escape. Clara stood on the rim of the canyon, looking out over the plains. She wore a dress of buckskin, bleached white by the sun, and moccasins beaded with the patterns gray grass had taught her. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her back was straight. Beside her stood a boy of 8, Davy. He was tall for his age, with hair like corn silk and a bow in his hand. He looked at the horizon with the fearless gaze of a child who has never known a cage. And beside him stood Tahuya. He was older now, the scars on his chest fading into the map of his skin. He rested his hand on Clara's shoulder. It was a heavy, grounding weight, the weight of a partner, not a master. They looked out at the vast, indifferent horizon of the West. It was a hard land. It took more than it gave. It was a land of blood and dust, where history was written by the victors and the cruel. But down in the canyon, the fire was lit. The water ran clear, and a family, forged in the fire of trauma and cooled in the waters of love, stood together. Elias was dust. The papers were ash. Clara took Tahuya's hand. She squeezed it. He squeezed back. "We are here," she said to the wind. "We are here," he answered. They turned back toward the shelter, walking down the path together, moving forward into a future that belonged to no one but themselves. Thank you for listening to this story of Clara and Tahuya. It is a tale of the West not often told, one of survival, the hard road to justice, and the healing power of love in a brutal world. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from today. It is always a joy to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of the frontier, written with the dust and the heart of the true West. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. What did you think of Clara's choice? Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon